So there's this thing that kind of really annoys me in the United States, and I don't know if it's come out because we're too rich for our own good and that's collapsing or whatever. But there's these girls that kind of talk around me and they kind of talk like this,
Uh-huh.
you know? And like they're all around me. All around me. They were in Chicago, they're here. There's different accents to the local flavor of the community. In New York, for instance, the beautiful capital of the world or whatever, these girls are rampant. And I think this is one of the reasons I hated living here. These people could be really nice, sweet people. Most of the time when I've actually looked under the hood and I've subletted with some of them, they're not. They're actually incredibly shallow, awful people. But they're pretty much, when I hear that sound, they're dead to me, you know? There's nothing there to really work on or salvage. And I want to know what you think about that, because I've definitely been thinking a lot about that all the time.
I mean, so your complaint is about girls who talk like that? That is the...
Yeah, I mean, you know them. And they'll be at dinner and they'll be like, oh, like that guy, and like he was doing something, and like I think he really likes me, but like I have this other boyfriend, and like, you know, like they're manipulating their voices. And the reason I know this has to be the case is because I went to our counterparts. Most of these people, you know, they can be of any race, you know, but I did go back to the mother countries for a lot of these folks in Europe, and they don't sound like that. I would know if it was in another language that they were manipulating their voices to sound like daddy little girl who, like, you know, like that kind of stuff.
So you think that like this is not the way they actually talk, that they're like affecting this sort of voice?
I mean, if this actually is a problem where people actually sound like that, then I think something's going on with the water here in the United States. I mean, like, I lived with one of these girls last week, Mike, and I had heard about her boyfriend and how her boyfriend lives in San Francisco and how they have an open relationship and how now she has two boyfriends. And I'm just like, look, that's awful, you know? I don't want two boyfriends. I mean, one boyfriend is plenty. And, like, if he doesn't like you, that's one thing or whatever. But, like, how can you live with yourself? Like, that's hard to have a boyfriend, you know? And then, like, Sunday, this was the worst. Like, she's like, Dan, because she knew I had a car. She's like, I need to pick up this, like, TV at my friend Brett's place. Could you go and, like, pick it up with me? And I was like, okay, sure, this sounds like an adventure. I'll do it, whatever. She's like, well, I don't know what time. It's, like, beautiful Sunday in October in New York. And I was just like, look, I'll go and pick this up for you. And so I picked it up for her. I brought her the TV, like, 1 in the morning, like, did all this work, carried it up and down the stairs, like, 2 different walk-ups. Had to park my car and then move it, all this shit. And then I brought it into her room, and then, like, the next day she was like, did you bring the remote? And I was like, oh my god. It was terrible.
Well, did you bring the remote or not?
No, I wasn't given the remote. And then the next night she came in and I was doing some business calls or whatever, and she's like, hey Dan, how are you? The first time she's ever asked me. And
right.
I was like, you know, things are going okay. But at this point, like, I kind of was past her as a human, I guess, in a lot of ways. And I was looking towards the end of my lease, my 6-day lease. And she's like, everything's kind of okay, but my dog died today. Like, her family dog, you know?
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, you know, I had a premonition that she would have a breakdown or collapse during these 6 days when I was living there. And I thought this would be the one. And
Right.
I was like, oh, that's terrible. And she's like, yeah, he was, like, old. We had him for 12 years. And my first boyfriend, like, he got it for me. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. And she's like, well, you know, it kind of happened all suddenly. Like, last night he was, like, kind of whimpering all night. And then my dad was going to work. And he was, like, shaking when he was going to work. And then by the time he got home, he was dead. And so there was really nothing that could be done. And, like, my dad was like, he knew he was on his way out. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I've had dogs, like, first of all, when my dog whimpers in the middle of the night, I've been known to take him to the emergency veterinary place. I know where all of them are. Secondly, like, and I don't mean to make you feel bad, but I was like, you know, secondly, if you're going to work in the morning and the dog is shaking in pain, you gotta call him late to work, you know?
Right.
You gotta take the dog in, like...
So you said both of those things to her?
I couldn't help myself. I was like, and you know, this is when I get into trouble, and I normally don't cross this line, but I was like, morally speaking, I can't stand here and agree with the idea that nothing could have been done about it, and I'm sorry. And I know that it's sad, but I couldn't. And she went further to say, like, well, what if he went to the vet and they charged us $1,000 and then he died anyway? And I was like, when you have a dog, it costs a lot of money, and you gotta fight for the dog's life. And like the thing is, like, you can always put them to sleep if they're sick. You know, you have that option. It's much more humane than letting the dog fucking whimper and shake and die over the course of like 16 hours. I mean, maybe he ate a battery, you know, and just pumped the stomach, and then he's fine. I mean, like, that I went a little bit too far on that one, but I couldn't control it, and I'm much better about it now, Mike. I have to be honest with you. I don't pick those fights. But this one was just like, and I'm partial to dogs, you know?
I do know that.
Nah,